All right. So I hope that was a good thought-provoking exercise for you just to take a second and think through some of your experiences. So I think it'll help you to become a better host as you think about some of the experiences you've had. So when I've thought through some of the experiences I've had, I want to share with you a list of some characteristics of a good host that I've experienced before. So I have a list here, and it's called Best versus Worst, Hospitality versus Hostility, okay, if you're making a list there. So I went to a pastor's home last year, and I arrived there, and they showed up with a babysitter, and they took my children and took them to have pizza and go out for ice cream, and they had the best day of their life. And then soon after that, they took my husband and I, we had to speak at this conference, and when it was done, they took us shopping, they took us for coffee. We got to their house, and they had an amazing steak dinner, and were so kind and generous to us. And then while we were at dinner, the doorbell rang, and a massage therapist showed up at the door and offered to give us massages. And it was just the most thoughtful experience I had ever had. And so when I think about outrageous hospitality, I think about that experience. So some of the things that represented hospitality for me were thoughtfulness, generosity, kindness. They planned things in advance. They used their time and resources. So you can probably think through your list and come up with some words that describe the thoughtfulness of people like this when we're talking about hospitality. Now, the hostility list, I have heard some pretty amazing and hilarious stories about people having bad hospitality experiences. But one that I'll share with you, and I want you to be able to share your story with someone too. But we had a friend over recently who was telling us that he stayed in someone's home, and when it was time to go to bed, they told him to quietly go sneak in the bedroom and sleep with the grandpa. And then the next day when he got up, the grandpa wasn't there, and he was just talking about how uncomfortable he felt, how unthought for he felt. And then this same guy had another hilarious story about going to someone's house, and they had cats running all over the dinner table, and were just he was allergic to cats, and it was just a hilarious experience thinking about how his experiences, how he wasn't considered really. So some words I had were uncomfortable. He felt very uncomfortable. Awkward. Things were not planned well. They were not considerate of his needs and his allergies and all those things. So you could go on and on with a list there for comparing that hostility to hospitality. So I encourage you to keep making that list for yourself. So let's now turn to 2 Kings 4, 8 through 11. And so this has been a guide for me to continue looking at these traits of hospitality that we're talking about. So if you'll turn there and let's read this together and continue on this list of hospitality versus hostility, okay? Okay, I'm going to add to the list actually. So let's start with verse 8. It says, "Now there came a day when Elisha passed over to Shunem, where there was a prominent woman, and she persuaded him to eat food." So I'm going to put in the hospitality list persuaded. And I'm also going to put food, because this is very important when we're talking about hospitality. And so it was, as often as he passed by, he turned in there to eat food. She said to her husband, "Behold, now I perceive that this is a holy man of God passing by us continually." So I'm putting perceptive. She was very perceptive. Verse 10 says, please let us make a little walled upper chamber and let us set a bed for him there, and a table and a chair and a lampstand, and it shall be when he comes to us that he can turn in there. So the word make there, I'm just putting up here work, like she was willing to do work and to set things up for this guy. Verse 11 says, one day he came there and turned into the upper chamber and rested. So this was a place where he could rest. Then he said to Gehazi, his servant, call this Shunammite. And when he had called her, she stood before him. He said to him, say now to her, behold, you have been careful with us with all this care. What can I do for you? So I'm going to put the word careful and care up here in the hospitality list. Would you be spoken for to the king or the captain of the army? And she answered, I live among my own people. So I love this here because we see that she was very content. She wasn't doing this so that people would recognize her. So I'm going to put contentment and pure motives. So verse 14, she said, what then is to be done for her? And Gehazi answered, truly she has no son and her husband is old. He said, call her. When he had called her, she stood in the doorway. Then he said, at this season next year, you will embrace a son. And she said, no, my lord, O man of God, do not lie to your maidservant. And so I love this here, just that she was honest. She's saying, don't lie to me or make empty promises. And then it ends with verse 17 saying, the woman conceived and bore a son at that season the next year, as Elisha had said to her. So the amazing thing about this passage for me is that this miracle happened. She bore a son that she had desired years ago because why? She was perceptive and she was willing to open her home to make bread for someone who was passing by. So some words here just in this passage are persuaded, food, perceptive, work, rest, careful, care, content, pure, honest. So I think this is a great list for us to look at when we're looking at characteristics of having a hospitable home.